Thanks for staying with us here on Live Now from Fox. I'm your host, Christina Evans. We do want to continue on with our coverage of today's top stories and this week's top stories, revisiting that trial that's now underway in Los Angeles. Do want to put up some video as well for you here of the rapper ASAP Rocky, who is now in court battling and standing trial for 2 felony charges that he fired a handgun at a former friend who's known by ASAP Relly. If convicted, Rocky could get up to 24 years in prison. There's been a lot of information coming out of that courtroom. We do want to now go to our friend and legal affairs journalist, Meghann Cuniff. She's here with the very latest. Meghann, thanks so much for joining us here on Live Now. We know you were in the courtroom watching as some of this testimony went down. And of course, everyone's still talking about that ASAP's very famous girlfriend, Rihanna, was also in that courtroom. First, though, let's focus on the trial. Can you explain the charges that Rocky is now facing and what could happen if he's convicted?
He is charged with 2 counts of first-degree assault with a semi-automatic firearm for the same nighttime confrontation with his former friend Relly. One of the charges alleges that he brandished the gun and pointed it at him, and then the second charge alleges that he actually fired the gun. And his defense is that he did fire a gun, but it wasn't a semi-automatic gun. He says it was a prop gun or a starter pistol that he carries on him for self-defense, and that he fired this as a warning because Relly was attacking their friend. And he also says earlier that he never actually pointed the gun at Relly, that this was a starter pistol and that Relly was the aggressor in this. And the only reason it was out was because Rocky was trying to warn him to back away. He's looking at a significant prison term if he's convicted of this. He did reject a plea deal that would have given him 180 days in county jail with a possible 7-year prison sentence to serve if he doesn't complete 3 years probation. But he rejected that and is taking it to trial. Prosecutors have said that they could recommend between 10 to 12 years in prison if he's convicted. I think the maximum is 24 years here, but it really remains to be seen what he could get in prison. But I think it's safe to say that it wouldn't be 180 days. But his team is confident that they can get an acquittal here.
And that's what I was going to go to next, because we heard about that plea deal. And a lot of people on social media were shocked that he didn't take that initially. So far in this case, we do know that it even had a few hiccups to getting started. Before those opening statements even happened late last week, there was issues about minutes of evidence there in the case with the defense's approach to the case as well as the prosecutors. Can you sort of break down what happened and the challenges that they initially had before this case could even get underway and be heard by a jury?
Yeah, prosecutors were upset about what they called an ambush by this prop gun defense. They said that the first they learned of this was through a statement, written notes from a statement that Rocky's lawyer, Joe Tacopina, had disclosed to them on the eve of trial. And they were saying that it should have been disclosed much sooner, that there's actually a court rule that requires oral or written statements from possible witnesses to be disclosed 30 days before trial. So they didn't get that disclosed ahead of time, except it's kind of all moot now. I mean, a lot of these arguments over evidence that feel like such a big deal kind of dissipate when the actual trial goes on. But prosecutors were upset about them not releasing that sooner. And then prosecutors kind of turned around and evened the tables by coming up with the ballistics report that had actually been in existence for over a year, but they said that they just found it. And it was about a 9mm magazine, not an actual gun, but a gun magazine that was in Rocky's home when police searched it in April 2022. And of course, the gun that was fired allegedly in the incident was a 9mm. So they're hoping that this magazine will help the jury connect Rocky to the shooting, because prosecutors are going to be arguing that this was the magazine that was used in the shooting. And the ballistics report says that while the bullets that police found in the magazine when they found it in April 2022 were different than the bullets that Relly says he picked up from the shooting scene, that they're still 9mm. So I think that's a big piece of evidence. But the case kind of comes down to, is the jury going to believe that Relly planted the shell casings himself, or came up with the shell casings himself and is lying and saying that he recovered them from the scene? Because that's one unique aspect of this case, is that police responded to a 911 call at the shooting scene, went to this area and searched around. They were looking for victims or any sign of a shooting, and they didn't find any shell casings. And then Relly went back an hour later and said it only took him a couple minutes to pick up the shell casings because he knew right where to go. So the defense is really riding on jurors thinking that he's lying about that. And then he actually brought these shell casings with him himself from to California and planted them uh, to lie and say that Rocky was using a real gun instead of a prop gun.
I think that is the most intriguing part from just the outside looking into this case, knowing that, again, ASAP Relly didn't go to police for a few days also after the shooting, where he brought the shell casings himself from the scene. We've also seen some of the injuries that have been shown in court as well. It seemed to be just nicks on his knuckle as well. Can you sort of talk about what the energy is in the room there in the courtroom? Of course, the jury is looking on. Is anybody showing any signs on their face that maybe they are believing ASAP Relly's story over the defense team that, I should say, ASAP Rocky has put together that is hoping to get him this not guilty verdict?
I will say the energy in the courtroom is terrible. It's awful in there. It'll just drain you by the end of the day. And part of it is just the stress of the trial. And it's not anyone doing anything particular, but it's just you get all those people in a courtroom. You have all the tension of the attorneys yelling back and forth. There's a prosecutor who really takes issue with everything. Rocky's lawyer, Joe Tacopina, is a strong advocate, so he's not going to, take any kind of flack from the prosecutor. So they really go back and forth on it. And there's so much at stake here for everybody involved that the energy in there is really terrible. But I think the jury is, they're in the box and they're a little bit more comfortable than the people who are crammed in the audience. So it's hard to really know what they're thinking. But I think we've got another week of this ahead. So I think it's stressful for everybody involved.
And of course, we have to talk about the Rihanna element of the entire thing. She's a superstar. She's standing there beside her man there in the courtroom, supporting him through this. I do also want to show this tweet that we have on X from AP Entertainment, showing Rihanna exiting the courtroom. That was during a lunch break. That's been a huge portion of this case as well. Even in those initial questions where they're asking the potential jurors before they actually came jurors, are you going to be swayed in any way by Rihanna being connected to this case? Of course, that being her partner. So, and then what are your initial thoughts on Rihanna being there in the courtroom? How has that garnered a reaction from those who are looking on?
I mean, it's such a kind of jaw dropper when she walks in because she's one of the most famous people on earth. And I think we're going to get the criticism from people saying that we're acting like, fangirls, or why can't we focus on the testimony? But also the entire trial is being streamed online. So I feel like my need to live tweet or report everything that's being said is a bit negated by the fact that the entire thing is being recorded, and we can get a running transcript of this and post video clips later in the afternoon if we can. But what's not being recorded is the audience. For a couple of days, there were no images of Rihanna in court because we're not allowed to film the audience or take photos. There was a sketch artist, Mona Schaefer Edwards, who's a famous sketch artist from LA, was hired by TMZ to go into the courtroom and do a sketch of her the other day. But other than that, we just didn't have any images of her. So I think there was a lot of interest in how she was. And of course, some people were laughing about, people wanting to know what she was wearing. But as we see here, she and Rocky are fashion icons. So of course, it makes sense that people would be curious about what she's wearing in court. So, questions like that are to be expected. But the first couple of days that she was in there, she was seated when journalists came in, and I believe when the jury when the jury walked in, she was already seated. And it was really kind of a question of, does the jury even know that she's there? Because it's not like the judge is pointing her out. No one's saying anything about her. She's just sitting over there with Rocky's mother and his sister. But yesterday, she had quite an appearance. It was in the middle of testimony, and she walked right into the front courtroom door through the public entrance because she wouldn't be able to walk through the back chambers door when the proceedings are going on. So I remember my head turned right as the door opened, and here walks Rihanna. It was like some kind of runway show or something. It was like, wow. And you have to imagine, especially knowing Joe Tacopina and his reputation and how he knows how to work the press and the media, that this had to have been intentional, because while the first 2 days it was unclear if the jury knew she was there, there's no way they could have missed her yesterday.
And we're also showing this tweet as well from Nancy Dillon. She's a Rolling Stones reporter showing
He's
Rihanna
the
leaving
best.
day 5. They asked her, how is she holding up? She said, I'm good, thank you. She did decline
Yeah.
to address the case. Not surprising. But again, she wants to show her support. It does seem like at this point for her partner. And as we're watching this, again, the cross-examination portion also started at the end of this week. A lot of folks are now saying from watching some of the video footage, as you mentioned, because it's all being live streamed as well, they're saying Relly's story isn't seeming to add up. It seems to be some inconsistencies that have happened. What is that like as the prosecution and the defense are going at it? And again, in this cross-examination portion, which is going to be extremely important for ASAP.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of issues to the cross-examination. First, in just how he's not answering the question, the constant need for the judge to intervene, but then the contradictions that he's made. And one, and I'm just recently, I'm putting a video of this up on my YouTube as we speak, but he's being asked about whether he's ever shot anything at a gun range, a 9mm at a gun range, because of course the defense needs to try to place him with a 9mm, because how else would he have come up with these spent shell casings? So they ask him, were you ever firing a 9mm? And he said, absolutely not. Really unequivocal denial. But then they pull out a video of him at a gun range firing a 9mm. So it's things like that that are very helpful to the defense, because if you can destroy Relly's credibility, I mean, there goes the case. They couldn't convict. But I think prosecutors are banking on the fact that they don't just have Relly's testimony. They have the surveillance videos of the shooting, and then they also have a 911 call. And that when you really get into the video of the shooting, which at first glance, if you're just on the internet and looking at it for 10 seconds, you can't see what's going on. But if you look at all the other videos that are around that area, you can place who the people are and see what's going on. And that the movement of the people tracks with what Relly is saying and what the 911 caller says. And it contradicts what Rocky's defense said about how he fired the shots as a warning, because the defense is that Relly was attacking their friend Elijah, who goes by Ills, and that Rocky fired the gun as a warning to try to stop him from doing that. But the prosecutor the other day went over the video that he said, and he's going to argue to the jury, that it shows Ills didn't start moving until after the first shot was fired. So I think it's things like that that prosecutors are hoping will tie the case together for the jury and make up for, after 3 hours of cross-examination, Relly said he wasn't sure if a bullet really grazed his knuckles. He just thought that it did, even though earlier he had said that he knew it was a bullet that grazed his knuckles. I mean, we have those kind of discrepancies, but it's going to be a question of, is it enough to overcome the big picture?
And let's talk about the text messages as well. In court, they've been showing text messages, alleged conversations between both ASAP Relly and ASAP Rocky. That even led to them meeting up initially. That was the reason it was all caught on text, and there were some texts allegedly after the exchange happened. What are your thoughts on those texts? Do you think that that's an important piece of evidence? Because the prosecution was really driving that home in their opening statements.
Yeah, and I think they're going to try to point to the text as saying, look, Rocky was the obvious aggressor. The fact that Relly had deleted text, that before this meetup, before this encounter on November 6, 2021, he had actually sent Rocky some text message that prosecutors described him as rude. And I think it would be subjective to say, were they rude? Were they threatening? But he said something like, beat me up or give me a reason or something, where he's just kind of talking trash to Rocky. And a few hours later is when Rocky responded. So Joe is focusing on the fact that when Relly handed his phone over to New York police, he had actually deleted those text messages, that they weren't visible on the phone. In redirect, prosecutors brought up that he deleted the messages before he even went to meet with Rocky. That when he deleted the messages between him and Rocky, that there weren't any new messages after that. It's just after he deleted those messages and when Rocky met up with him, challenging him to a fight. So the implication from the defense was that Relly was destroying evidence that would try to refute his case. So prosecutors might think that they did a good job of refuting that. But again, all these are small details that matter. But the big picture involves all the text messages, the video, the confrontation, and then the very specific defense that they put forth in the opening statement about the alternative theory about what happened.
And Meghann, court resumes on Monday at 10:30. So, first of all, will you be there in the courtroom? Can we count on you for some of those live Twitter updates? And also,
Absolutely.
yeah, what happens next in this next week? What do you expect for us to see?
I think we're going to see the prosecutors rest. We're going to get the ballistics report in, a few more prosecution witnesses, but then we're going to be on to Rocky's case. He's going to be calling defense witnesses. It's a big question of whether he's going to testify. Normally, in a case like this, I would say no, and I'm still leaning toward no, because the problem with testifying for a defendant is always the cross-examination. But this case is unusual, and his lawyer has an unusual approach to things that really could work for him, and that if they can put Rocky up there to explain this, that's a big question, whether we're going to see him testify. But he has a couple surefire defense witnesses, one being somebody who was actually there that night. He goes by 12E, but Jamel Phillips is the one who's actually going to say that Rocky had a prop gun. Because what's interesting to consider is right now there is no evidence in the trial record about a prop gun, because what his lawyer says is not evidence. And right now nobody has testified about this being a prop gun, but that's all going to come in through defense witnesses.
And again, it's going to be something interesting that we're going to continue to follow here on Live Now. But okay, another thing that's happened before I let you go, we also heard the news this week that Diddy has also been listed in a superseding indictment. Can you talk about what that means? I know you're very focused on the ASAP Rocky case right now, but if you saw this report, what's happening there with Diddy as well?
Yes, we were all looking at that when it came down. We were all actually out in the hallway for the Rocky trial, and we saw that there'd been a superseding indictment. And we were all pretty shocked that, one, it doesn't have any co-defendants listed. Still, the only defendant is Diddy. And then when we scrolled through, it's still the same 3 charges. And I think a lot of people had expected maybe not more charges against him, but people did think that he was going to get co-defendants. But there are no co-defendants names, except if you read through the details, it includes more details and identifies 2 additional victims, not by name, but in the previous indictment, it was just one woman, victim 1, and now there are 2 additional victims in there. So one thing this could do is push the trial back. He's scheduled to go to trial in May, but with a superseding indictment, the prosecutors could secure a later trial date, or he could want a later trial date to prepare too. But I think a lot of people are surprised that that it wasn't more than it was, and people are kind of wondering, are we ever going to see co-defendants here?
And I think a lot of people are still questioning who that alleged third person was in the room in the civil lawsuit that's been filed as well with, of course, the famed lawyer Tony Busby and his client. They named Jay-Z, they named Diddy. People are still wondering who that alleged third celebrity is. Still something that we're going to have to keep our eyes on, I'm sure.
Yes, exactly. There's a lot of unknowns. It's finally February 1st. We had the longest January ever.
Certainly, it feels like it. Again, legal affairs journalist Meghann Cuniff here to break down the very latest as it pertains to some of these celebrities in court in those cases. Meghann, we appreciate you having you as always.
Thanks so much.
All right, we did want to get that in for you here on Live Now from Fox. On the other side of our 2-minute break, we're going to play out a few of those moments there inside of the courtroom as ASAP Rocky and ASAP Relly are there in this case. But again, stay with us for the next 2 minutes. We'll play that out on the other side.